Thank you, Jason. Want to change gears a little bit for the rest of this month, and I want for us to study from the book of Daniel. Feel like the book of Daniel is probably a little more applicable for the whole group of us, so there's lessons in the book of Daniel that the kids will remember, and we'll make some further application to some of that as we go through. Two or three things I want to do tonight with kind of the introduction of this book. The first thing I want to just say is this. I think that most of us know already and probably could recite from memory quite a bit about the book of Daniel, especially the first 6 chapters. It's lessons and stories that we've been told in Bible class since the time that we were little bitty. Those are important. I love the text. I love doing the background and looking at the historical context with all that. It's one of the things I really enjoy doing. But what I want to do tonight is take a look at some of the underlying, I'm not real sure what to call it, but it's kind of an underlying theme that kind of flows underneath this text. And there's actually several of these, and that's what I want to do for the next three or four weeks, I think, and look at some of these lessons that are floating around underneath the text. And you'll see when we get into this, you'll see what I'm talking about. So the other thing I want to do tonight is kind of encourage our young people with remembering what's in the chapters of books. So what I want for us to do real quick is think through together the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel. So here's a little bit, a hint of what's in some of these books, okay? So one of the things that I really want to encourage y'all to do, our young people, be able to take a book like Daniel, probably the first 6 chapters, and be able to get a few sentences to describe each of the chapters. So you should be able to go, Daniel 1 is this, Daniel 2 is this, Daniel 3 is this, Daniel 4 is this, Daniel 5, Daniel 6, where you can just pop through those. In the bigger books like the book of Genesis and Exodus, like in the book of Genesis, I do characters as they show up. So, you got Adam is the first character, and then the next main character would be Noah, and then you have Abraham, and then you have Joseph. So you can kind of go through the main characters like that with some of the bigger books, and also have a quick memory, a quick idea about what's in these books, and I think that's very important for us in our Bible study. So if you have your Bibles, open up to the book of Daniel. Let's talk through real quick, remind ourselves of what's going on in the first 6 chapters, okay? Because at chapter 7, this book changes dramatically, but the first 6 books is what we want to spend our time with for the next few weeks. So Daniel chapter 1 is the story of how Nebuchadnezzar goes to Jerusalem. He besieges the capital city of Jerusalem, and he takes Jehoiakim, who was the king, and apparently a few of the young men like BJ. They were intelligent and good-looking, and had a great future. Those are the kinds of guys that Nebuchadnezzar was looking for. And he takes a few of them back. He doesn't destroy the whole city, at least not in this initial time. And he brings them back, and remember, he puts them in school. And he's going to teach them for 3 years. In a kind of a re-education school, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. The 4 guys that we know of were Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So those are the guys that we know of that are by name in there. And at the end of chapter 1, these are the best 4. There were 4 valedictorians in their class. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Top 4 guys out of all of the guys they brought back. And perhaps they brought back some other nobles and good-looking fellas from other cities that they conquered during this little conquest. So there's chapter 1. Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar, remember, has a dream. And he calls all of the magicians in and he says, hey, tell me what my dream is. And I wondered if he had forgot his dream. I wonder if he knew he had a dream, but he couldn't remember what it was. Kind of an interesting thought there. At any rate, he told his magicians, tell me what my dream is and tell me what my dream meant. And remember, none of them had any idea what he was talking about. Finally, word gets back to Daniel. Daniel comes and visits with the king, and tells the king about the great statue that he saw that had the head of gold, silver chest, bronze thighs, and iron feet. And he says, King, you've had a dream about the future. So basically that is Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 3 is an interesting chapter because apparently Daniel has gone. He's apparently off doing the king's business somewhere. And the only people we know in Daniel chapter 3 are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. King Nebuchadnezzar sets up the big gold idol, the big golden man on the plains of Dura, and tells everybody as soon as you hear the songs, you've got to bow down and worship. So Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego have to show up because they're three of the rulers. The music hits, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do not bow down to the idol. King gets mad. I'm going to throw you in the fire. Throws them in the fire. There's all of a sudden 4 guys in there. King brings them out and says, hey, you serve a great God. Promotes them in. That's Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 4 is again, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. Daniel comes, it's a dream of a big tree that gets cut down. Remember the tree gets cut down, and then all of a sudden there's a guy out in the field eating grass, and he's got dew on his back. And that ends up being King Nebuchadnezzar. He gets super proud. God humbles him. He goes out on the field for 7 seasons before he comes to his senses, and then he comes back to himself, and he's king again, and he acknowledges that God is God. Daniel chapter 5 is, between Daniel chapter 4 and chapter 5, some period of time has taken place there. Not absolutely how long there, but I don't know, maybe 40 years or so between chapter 4 and 5. Nebuchadnezzar's, probably his grandson by the name of Belshazzar is now in power. And you remember Belshazzar has this great party. And I wish we had more time. We're going to spend some more time on chapter 5 because it is so fun. At any rate, that's where the handwriting on the wall, you remember the handwriting on the wall? That's in Daniel chapter 5. And Daniel comes in, tells him what it means. Basically, it means you've been weighed and found wanting, and you're going to lose your life. And he loses his life that night, and that is the end of the Babylonian Empire. So the Babylonian Empire ends at the end of Daniel chapter 5 and then Daniel chapter 6. And what happens in Daniel chapter 6? Somebody, y'all help me out. What happens in Daniel chapter 6? Daniel in the lions. That's Daniel chapter 6. It's Daniel in the lion's den. Okay? So y'all remember that. The king said, don't pray. Daniel said, I'm going to pray. They catch him praying, and they throw him in the lion's den. Lions can't eat him, and they bring him out and promote him. So there's the first 6 chapters in a nutshell. Very easy. Just takes a few minutes. Again, let me encourage you to be able to do that especially in Daniel as we're going through this week. Now, the reason I want to do that is because underneath Daniel, the first 6 chapters in the book of Daniel, is several underlying themes, and the one I want to look at is really highlighted in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 19. 1 Peter 4:19 says, therefore those who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is good. The word entrust is huge in the book of Daniel. And this is a lesson that I believe every one of us in this room, I think it's especially important for our young people, but every one of us in this room can benefit from checking whether or not I have entrusted my life to my Creator, especially in the context of the culture that we are currently in. Let's run through Daniel chapter 1, and let me give you some examples. Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. So we're going to read right now quite a bit of Daniel chapter 1. I don't remember how many. There's 6 or 7 of these. We'll try to go through them pretty fast. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem to besiege it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. He brought them into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Now, this may seem fairly insignificant to us. I mean, he took over Jerusalem and he stole some gold cups and put them in the house of his God. So what? Well, What do you think a lot of the Jews would have done if somebody came into their most holy place and took some of their holy vessels and took it and put it in the house of their God? What do you think they would have wanted to do? Let's go get it. Let's go seek vengeance on them. Let's go get those things back and put them back in the temple. What's interesting here in Daniel is that there is no indication through any of this that there was any attempt to go get those golden vessels back. I would suggest to you that that is because Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have entrusted themselves to Jehovah God and for the punishment that he's bringing on them. I think they realize this is just part of the deal, that these guys get to take these vessels and put them in their house. Now, I don't think they were happy about it, but there's no indication that they try to get them back. Now, does anybody know where these vessels show back up? If you miss this, you've missed the whole point here. You know where these show back up? Daniel chapter 5, when Belshazzar is having his big party with all of his guys, you know what they're drinking the sacred wine out of? The vessels from God that they put in the temple that they stole from God's temple, they put in their own temple. What happens that night? The Babylonian Empire gets judged. They are removed from power that night because Belshazzar took the cups that Nebuchadnezzar had brought and put them in their temple. And God uses those vessels to bring judgment on the Babylonians at that party. To me, that just blows me away. You know what that tells me? That tells me that entrusting ourselves to God is the exact thing to do, even though sometimes it doesn't even seem right. It doesn't seem fair that the Babylonians should steal these cups and put them in their temple. But God used them as a tool later, entrusting themselves to their Creator. Look at verses 3 through 5. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the noble youths, in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, who had the ability in serving in the king's court. He ordered him to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food, the wine which he drank, appointed they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which time they would enter the king's personal service. Among them, from the sons of Judah, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander changes their names. To Daniel, he gave the name Belshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Azariah, Abednego. So what do we see here? Well, Nebuchadnezzar comes in to Jerusalem, and he besieges them first, and then he conquers them. And he grabs the best guys, the best youths he could find, he's going to carry back to Babylon. Now, what we don't know in this story is, what did he do to these youths' parents? Well, Babylonians, they didn't like to leave loose ends. It's very possible they just killed them. Killed the parents, took the kids, then there's no reason to go home. Maybe burned their house. No reason to go home. So they take them back, and they're putting them in this re-education school, if you will. They changed their names, and by the way, they changed their names to the names of the gods of the Babylonians. So Daniel is renamed after Bel, and each one of them is renamed after one of their gods. Now, again, put yourself in that situation. If you were there, what would you want to do? Do you think that you would be a willing student in the school of the Babylonian history, learning their language? They changed your name. They killed your parents, probably. They stole you from your house and from your culture. Are you going to be a willing student? I'd suggest to you, most of us in this room would not be willing. What do we know about Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel? They were the best students they could possibly be. They took it on themselves and entrusted themselves to Jehovah God to make the best of this situation. You know what? They didn't throw any. They didn't throw a protest. They didn't throw rocks and break windows. They said, you know what? I don't know what God is doing here, but I will entrust myself to Him. Verse 8. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Interesting here that as the king brings in their choice food and their wine, it's very possible, and I think this was Daniel's opposition, that these foods had been offered to the idols. And so the king, since these guys were going to serve in the king's army, in the king's service, he was going to feed them the foods of the gods. And as they ate those foods, at least in the eyes of the Babylonians, they would be taking those gods in themselves, and they would become more faithful servants. I have no doubt that was the plan. And I think it's interesting, Daniel, once again, does not throw a big fit. He doesn't throw a temper tantrum. He doesn't sit down on a hunger strike. Did you notice what Daniel does here? Would it be okay if I ate something else? He asks for permission. And he seeks God's favor. And as we continue reading then in verses 9 down through verse 16, verse 9 says, God granted Daniel favor. So again, Daniel entrusted himself to God. He's going to keep God's laws. That's one thing that Daniel will never give up on. So he's not given up on God's commission to eat clean foods and not eat things offered to idols. He doesn't want to have any part of that. God grants him, but he just asks permission. Again, I would suggest to you that he has entrusted himself to God. Done it God's way. Not some kind of temper tantrum, throw a fit, roll on the ground, bite your teeth, you know. Is it okay? As we read from verse 9 down through the rest of verse 16, we remember the story here. He asks the overseer. The overseer says, we'll try it for 10 days and see how it goes. Remember, at the end of 10 days, it says they were fatter than the use. I think that probably means something different than what we might take that to mean. I think that means they looked great at the end of that 10-day period. That's verse 15. They looked great. They looked better than anybody who had eaten the king's choice foods. And so the overseer continued to withhold the king's food and wine, and he just gave them fruits, veggies, and water, I guess. They entrusted themselves to God. They took God's principles, and they were willing. And I think had this escalated, I think Daniel maybe had plan B, but I think it's interesting, plan A works. He just asked for permission, and God grants it to him. He wanted to do his will. He had entrusted himself to the laws of God. Look down at verse 17. As for these four youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every brand of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. As we mentioned, these four guys ended up being the four valedictorians of the class. Here's my question. Do you think that God just gave them an automatic download? Did God take a USB port, plug it into their heads, and go and download all that information? You think that's what God did? Has God ever done that? Well, he maybe did it to Adam. Gave half to Eve. Oh, I'm kidding. So he did that initially with Adam and Eve. Has he ever done it before? Ever again after that? How do men gain wisdom, and how do they gain knowledge, and how do they gain understanding? By study, by work. God blesses their labors, but I guarantee you these guys had to work to get it in their brain just like every one of us in here. I do not believe that God just miraculously went poof and they're done. Once again, I would suggest these men have entrusted themselves to God. They were going to be the best servants. If they've got to serve the king of Babylon, if they've got to serve Nebuchadnezzar, they're going to be the best ones that they can possibly be. and seek blessing from God as they entrust their futures to Him, whatever those futures might look like. And then verse 18 and 19, at the end of the days when the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of all of them no one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so they entered into the king's personal service. Again, I just think that's interesting, that the man that came and stole them from their home country, who perhaps had killed their family, who had put them in a re-education institute, who had taken their birth names away from them and named them after foreign gods, that is now who they get to serve. Now, again, I would think that a lot of us, if that had happened to us, we might want to try to secretly poison said Nebuchadnezzar. Or we might want to slip behind him and stab him in the back somehow. Or we might try to run away. What do these guys do? They are the best they can be. They realize that God has placed them in the Babylonian Empire and will give them a position third, fourth, fifth in the nation here in a little bit. He places them as He needs them. Why? Because they have entrusted themselves to their Creator and continue to do what was best. 2 more points and we're almost done. What can we expect when we entrust ourselves to our Creator? So let's say that we behave just like Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. What can we expect? Well, as you read the 6 chapters, what happens with them? Is everything puppies and flowers? No. Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get thrown in a big ball of fire. What happens to the guys that are around them? Are they best buddies with all those guys? Remember what the text says? Everybody hates them. My point is this: when we entrust ourselves to our Creator, we just better be watching for persecution. We better be watching for difficulties that are going to lie ahead. God never said, look, you trust me, you entrust your life to me, and you will never have pain again. You'll never have a heartache again. Everybody will like you. Everybody will befriend you. That has never been the deal. If we entrust ourselves to our Creator, we can expect difficulties that lie ahead. Last slide, and that is this. What kind of attitudes, then, do we need to adopt to help us entrust ourselves to our Creator? Well, once again, I think throughout these first 6 chapters, we find several attitudes. I just jotted these 3 down. You can find some others in your own study. These first 2 really come out of chapter 3. I think the first attitude we need to have is that I serve a God who can. And then you can just fill in the blank there. Because we serve a God who can do anything. I serve a God who can heal my dad of cancer. Heal my mom of cancer. I serve a God who could raise my grandfather from the dead. He could. He can. He's got that power. We serve a God who can do anything. And as we entrust ourselves to Him, we understand we got a God who can do. And now that doesn't mean He always will. Doesn't mean He's a puppet on a string for me to control like a little robot or something. No, I entrust myself to Him, and I realize He can, and that brings us to point number 2, where even if He does not, it's okay with me. I serve a God who can, and entrusting myself to my Creator says, and even if He does not do what I ask Him, I still follow Him. He is still my God. He's still my Creator, and I will entrust myself to Him. And that's really point number 3. I will serve Him anyway, regardless of what happens. I serve a God who can, even if He does not do what I ask, I'll serve Him anyway, is probably the overall theme of Daniel chapter 1 through 6. Because it embodies us entrusting ourselves to our Creator. So, the word entrust is never found in chapters 1 through 6. Do you see how that underlies this? Do you see how the text, it's embedded in that text? As a matter of fact, you can go through the rest of these 6 chapters and take that in little pieces like we did chapter 1, and you'll find over and over and over again this idea that it's embedded inside there. This teaching of entrusting ourselves. So what I want to do with the book of Daniel over the next 2 or 3 weeks is look at a few more of these. There's some other things that underlie this text that come out in our study as we begin to kind of concentrate on looking for some of these characteristics, if you will, that are in this text. Well, we do want to offer an invitation. Jason, you want to come on down? Do want to offer an invitation this evening, and if you have any need, if you need to be baptized into Christ tonight, or if you need the prayers of the congregation to help you entrust yourself to your Creator, we'd love to give you an opportunity to come right now as we stand and sing.